Peace, family. In this presentation, we'll be talking about a little known history of 9/11. That day in history and how the people who brought the towers down would have had knowledge of it because they acted as if they did. We'll start off with Hudson, who was an explorer. So in 1609, Hudson was chosen by the merchants of the Dutch East Indian Company in the Netherlands to find an easterly passage to Asia. While awaiting orders and supplies in Amsterdam, he heard rumors of a northwest route to the Pacific through North America. Hudson had been told to sail through the Arctic Ocean north of Russia into the Pacific, so to the Far East. On August 4th, the ship was at Cape Cod, from which Hudson sailed to the entrance of Chesapeake Bay. Rather than entering the Chesapeake, he explored the coast to the north, finding Delaware Bay, but continued north. On the 3rd of September, he reached the estuary of the river that initially was called the North River, or Mauritius, and now carries his name. He was not the first European to discover it, though, as it has been known since the voyages of Giovanni da Verrazzano. So, just since we brought up the name Verrazzano, let's think of the areas that Verrazzano went to. And when he was in these areas, he described the natives as being black, not unlike the Ethiopians. So remember that. On the 6th of September, 1609, John Coleman and his crew was killed by Indians with an arrow to the neck. So Hudson sailed into the upper bay on the 11th of September. The following day began his journey, what is now known as Hudson River. Over the next 10 days, his ship ascended the river, reaching a point where the present-day capital of Albany is located. So on September the Bay, the guy Hudson, in which the Hudson River is named after, sailed the Hudson River. He basically founded the Hudson River on September 11, 1609. But another thing that's important about this area is that the location of an African burial ground, what they call an African burial ground, because I'm sure it's just black remains, but they're going to tie it back into slavery and all of that stuff. But the bones of some 20,000 African slaves are buried 25 feet below lower Manhattan, as at least 10% of West African slaves in America was Muslim. It's not our bonds to extrapolate that Ground Zero itself was built on the bones of at least a few Muslim slaves, that is to say, hollow Muslim ground. For some time, activists, historians, and city officials have been working together to excavate and preserve the bones of the slaves buried under present-day Lower Manhattan. A recent excavation of 14,000 square foot section of the 6-acre burial found that 92% of the 419 were of African descent, 419 skeletons, and 40% were children under 12. The bones of the 419 slaves were eventually re-entered. African slaves couldn't be buried in New York City itself, so they were put to rest along the city's northern border near present-day Chambers Street. The exact border of the burial grounds are fuzzy, and experts say that without test digs, they won't be able to tell how far it extends. The area that they've excavated so far ends up just a block or two from Ground Zero, but with the huge number of African slaves that lived and died in New Amsterdam, I find it hard to believe that the burial ground didn't exist farther. At any rate, some of the slaves belonging were definitely at Ground Zero. About 100 boxes of artifacts from the African graves were stored at World Trade Center 6, which was crushed by the North Tower on 9/11. But thankfully, activists were able to recover them. A few items were a string of blue beads found buried with the slaves, which some think was Islamic prayer beads. So on the 25th, this is early history, that after the expiration of 4 weeks from the day hereafter, no Negro be buried within the bounds and the limits of the churchyard of Trinity Church, that is to say, in the rear of the present burying place, and that no person or Negro whatsoever do presume after the term above limited to break upon the ground for the burying of his Negro, as they will answer it at their peril, and this order be forthwith published. So this is just going over the law that they had, where basically Negroes, as they call them, couldn't be buried in the New York limits. So not only on 9/11 do we have the founding of Hudson Bay, by this English explorer or whatever. So we have him actually coming into this area where we call it Manhattan and all of this stuff around 9/11, September 11th. And we also have this Beardland being on top of African slaves. Not only any African slaves, but they was shown to be African Muslim slaves. So in this Free Black Society presentation, I want you to know that it ain't nothing that these people would do that they didn't